5th, 2020 Carroll County Broadband Committee meeting to order at 10 a.m. sharp. There is an attendance sheet for everybody that's here in person and the folks that are on virtually. Paul is going to keep track of all the names that come up on the screen, so we'll have a good idea of who's who. The next item, I'd like you to join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand. Behind us over there. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Hey, there's Steve. Steve, welcome to the meeting.
Hey, Steve.
Hey, Steve.
It's good to see your face. Next item on the agenda. I'd like to give a thank you to Paul O'Brien and the town of Wolfeboro and the select board here for hosting this meeting under these difficult times. It's hard to get a setup where they have everything that we need, from video recording to, virtually to in person, and being able to socially distance. So thank you, Paul, and please express our thank you to the select board. And I'd like to turn it over to Paul if he would like to make any announcements with regards to how all this works.
Okay, can you all hear me out there in TV land? If you can, just nod your head. Nod your head. If you can you all hear me out there? Timothy? Yeah? Oh, there you go. Can you guys hear me outside in Jerry Canuck? Can you hear me? Marshall, everybody, you can hear me? Okay, good. So your microphones are off at the moment, and you can see that on your screen. If you want to turn them on, go ahead and do that, but I would just advise you to keep them on mute, because the more people turn them on, it gets really echoey out there, and it gets kind of nutty. So when you want to speak, just raise your hand, and we'll then ask you to turn on your mic. I can see people. For those of you who aren't using a camera, if you want to speak, just activate your microphone, and I'll see you come on, and I'll recognize you at the appropriate time. This meeting is being live streamed on YouTube right now, and I think a copy of that is going to be available if somebody wants to go back and see how lovely they looked on television. Thanks to you, Rick, for pulling this stuff together. I think we got all we need to have, so for the rest of us in the room, if you're going to be speaking, please speak into a microphone as well. We can hear each other here, but we want to make sure that the folks outside this room, good morning, Jeb, can hear us as well. Okay? So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to you, Rick.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Next item on the agenda, I'd like to say thank you to our New Hampshire State Senator, Jeb Bradley, and also our New Hampshire State Rep, Jerry Canuck, who are both members of our committee, and they were very instrumental in getting the legislation passed in this past session. So I'd like to just say thank you to them for their help. Most of today's meeting is going to be informational, bringing everybody up to speed on what's been going on since our last meeting. So with that said, next item on the agenda is legislation just passed in the New Hampshire legislature. As you should know, HB 1111 was signed by the governor on July 22nd, I believe. And it is now in force in full as of September 20th, I believe. And the legislation basically consisted of approving communications district and the process for that, It has put some teeth into the RFI, request for information process. If the ISP doesn't respond in a 60-day period. The state will have a model document for the future of RFI requests after December 31st of this year. And communications districts or municipalities may issue bonds. That's all part of the legislation that just recently passed. I sent out, when it did pass, to everybody on my mailing list copies of HB 1111, and I also sent it out again last evening in case you misplaced it, because it was a long time ago. So take a good look at that. We'll be dealing with that in the future. Any questions on the legislature and the legislation just passed in the 2019-20 legislature? Okay, pretty self-explanatory. Okay, the next item on our agenda is new legislation. From all indications, and dealing with a lot of the folks taking care of our feasibility study and speaking with ISPs around the country, as well as in the state of New Hampshire, one of the biggest time-consuming and expense problems is pole make-ready attaching process. And we have submitted to Jeb Bradley as well as Jerry Knirk 2 items of to be submitted for legislation. One would be to adopt the FCC's one-touch make-ready process, which is used across the country. And the second proposal is to clarify under the administrative rules of the New Hampshire PUC an item that makes the parties that agree to the pole attachment process for your particular project, okay, to abide by the rules that they've created. And when I submitted these to Senator Bradley, he called and we had a great discussion. He is also putting together legislation himself with regard to funding. And that's all I can tell you at this point, because I think it's still in its infancy as far as being drafted. And as soon as I hear more, I'll certainly email it out to everybody. But I thought that was pretty encouraging. Is there any questions on the new legislation that we're submitting? Yep. I see Jerry up there. Do you have anything to add to that, Jerry?
No, I do not. I think that you've covered it well, and our filing period is closed. Our initial filing period is closed. After the election, there's another filing period. So at that point, then, you know, Jeb and I can decide which way to best handle this. We're trying to minimize how many bills are filed, because all the work is going to have to be done remotely and will therefore be a lot more complicated. So often we have parallel Senate and House bills. I think that would not be a good idea this time around, but Jeb and I can work out those details.
Yeah, and let me just, first of all, say thanks to Jerry. I think we'll team up on this one. Rick sort of highlighted the thought that I've had, and at this point it's really a thought more than any concrete legislation, as our filing hasn't started. But I think even though this is going to be a very difficult budget year because of the pandemic, what I'm going to propose is state funding similar to what the governor had proposed under with the CARES funding, but state dollars without some of the rigorous guidelines for timing that the CARES Act had, there would be a matching grant program. So it would be, at least in the way I'm thinking about it, we put in state funding to be matched by municipalities, possibly counties, districts. I mean, I think this is all, subject to discussion, and I'm more than happy to have, conversations with anybody that has any good ideas about how to structure this. And then, move forward with it. As I said, it'll be a tough budget year getting any funding at all, but at least I would want to try. And my guess is that as we get further into the, pandemic relief funds, and as there's maybe another stimulus bill, there will be more federal funding for broadband deployment. So if we had a matching grant program on the books in New Hampshire, I think we'd have at least the opportunity to use any federal funds, any grant funds that we got, and hopefully state funds, to jumpstart this process. So that's my initial thought. And as I said, happy to, discuss this with anybody. I think Jerry obviously would probably, I would hope, want to be a co-sponsor of that. I see a thumbs up. That's a good thing. All right, we're already off to a bipartisan start. That's a good thing. Thank you, Jerry. Both of us have to get reelected for that to happen, but we'll see. We'll see what happens. And I feel like, this is clearly something we've learned from the pandemic, that the rural areas in New Hampshire need that jump start. I mean, I think of the town of Sandwich that has virtually no broadband in it anywhere. There are towns like Sandwich, around New Hampshire that just need that help. So everybody knows how to get me, I hope, and I'm happy to have that conversation.
I'm sure we'll be talking in the future, Jeb. And I've asked both Jeb and Jerry to work together on all this legislation. They did such a nice job in the last legislature. So we're a good team.
I have a question.
Yes.
So in terms of the two RSAs, the two RSA requests, the LSRs, they're both addressing the issue of pole access and trying to make it easier and a lot faster and less expensive, presumably, to get pole access. Do you expect, and I guess I'd ask both Jeb and Jerry this question, do you expect any opposition on those for people in the regulated community? So.
Probably.
I would say.
Who knows, Matt? I mean, I think too early to tell.
Yeah.
Look, the phone companies and the electric companies are pretty, have their own proprietary rights, so to speak, that they fight fiercely for. We've had this battle over taxation in the past. However, the world is changing in terms of, the impact that the pandemic has had on telemedicine, on schools, on distance learning, on commuting from home. And I think that there will be a realization, I suspect across the board by members of the legislature, that we've got to facilitate, these attachments. And so I think it will be more an issue of, working with the providers, the pole owners, as opposed to them trying to block it, because the world is moving on quickly and broadband is absolutely essential. I think, my friend Pat Farley's on the phone call, and where Pat lives, You know, it's right on Route 16, no broadband. Hardly can talk to Pat on the cell phone, you know, so it's, I just use that as an example along with Sandwich. I'm sure Jerry, I'm sure everybody on this call has the examples. That's why I think we'll be successful, especially if, you know, we have the case to be made, which we do.
I don't think I'm giving away any real
Carol Miller
secrets to say
had her hand up,
broadband
Jerry.
is a priority. Yeah, let me say, broadband's a priority in the House Democratic Caucus. I don't think that's a big secret. I was going to tell you, please call on Carol Miller. Her hand has been up. I don't know if you can see her.
Yep,
Hi there. Good morning. Can you hear me?
we can hear you now.
We got you.
After two computers, I found one with Chrome on it, so I'm able to connect. So if I turn my head, I'm looking at my other computer where all the documents are. I just want to comment on the one-touch poll legislation. Those states that have passed one touch are still grappling with the effects of it. They cannot agree on who's going to touch the wire. And so there are big feuds going on. Nobody has made that work across the country. So just to make you aware, even if we pass that, it does not, it will present its challenges all by itself. And that's to find somebody they all agree can touch all their wires. So I just wanted to let you know that piece. It's, you know, the one touch is a federal rule. We don't really oppose it. We haven't adopted it, but it is one of those things that could happen now. But like I say, the challenges, even for the states that have adopted it, are very, very serious. So it's still long range, and I just wanted to share that with the committee.
Yeah, with that said, I mean, even if this brings the problem or the issue to the forefront and get it on the table, maybe we can come up with something better too.
Could I as well?
Go ahead, Paul.
Hi, everybody. This is Paul. So the question for all of us would be the following. Take the current New Hampshire's poll attachment process timeline, which is published. It's on the state website. It's on the Public Utilities Commission website. Then take whatever we think we are going to realize should there be a one-touch make ready, and then the distance between the one-touch make ready and the current is the benefit allegedly that we get. Okay? So that would be an interesting math exercise to do. Part two of this, which I think Carroll has touched on, is when you shorten the process, that's good. You can take time out of the process, but do you put more cost into it? So does the average cost of attaching go up when you reduce the process? I haven't seen any math. What I've seen in other states who've tried this is the cost to attach on a one-touch basis goes up. So that all gets passed along to the consumer. So we better make sure we understand, and it's great that we're doing it, because anytime we get more speed in the process, which I think is the ambition of the legislation, anytime we can get a little more speed in there, good, as long as the offset to the speed isn't confusion, as Carroll has pointed out, and cost. If those things are, if those are the byproducts of this thing, then we're making a bad piece of legislation. So I would encourage all of us to help Jeb and help all of the sponsors dig around in this so that we don't do anything, wind up saying, oh great, we just fixed a problem and it's going to cost us more. That would not be a right model.
I would just add to that also, another big challenge with regards to pole attachments is the insurance required. That was found out by the town of Bristol in their fiber project. Come to find out that the pole owners required insurance to quite the tune, $30,000 a year worth of a tune, and that was for a small network. So there are other things to look at as well, so just be aware.
I'm going to recognize Bert, and then Bill will get you right after Bert.
Okay, I've got a couple of things. My town is desperate. I live in Chatham, and I have a neighbor with 4 children in school, different grades, and they just can't do it. So timing of all this is really of the essence for us. And there's a couple things. I've been under the impression that GWI was willing to finance this whole thing. I don't know how much is required for that, for there to be grants. But so I'm not really understanding the whole picture. And I also understand that if we had to, we could run our own poles. The right of way is public, and we could just put the poles in, and that could be cheaper than the insurance. Who knows? But I urge us to go as quickly as we possibly can. Thank you.
Thank you, Bert. Mr. Gassman, open your mic up. There you go.
We ran into 2 problems in Molten Borough. We're working with a small fiber and fixed wireless provider, and we were trying to put fiber to 20 homes in a small neighborhood, and they found that all the poles were out of code. They said many of them were rotten, and just, basically they couldn't do it without replacing the poles, and so that was going to add a big cost to it. The second issue that came up in another project, was a small project with fiber to the house, was that the town did not have a deed on record for who owned the pole. So we have to create an easement to allow the pole to connect to the power. And so it's just, there's all sorts of little issues that come up as you do this. We're finding it's just not simple.
Carol Miller.
Carol Monroe has her.
Carol Miller, raise your hand.
I do have my mic off,
I'm sorry.
but my name is Monroe.
I'm sorry. My bad.
A couple of things with this. One, when you go to get pole attachment agreement, the barriers are, as someone pointed out, insurance in some cases. So 30,000 is a bit high for what I've considered, and I don't understand the Bristol scenario because in Lyme the insurance is more like 10, but it's still insurance and it's still an operations cost. And then the second is that you have to provide a letter of credit or a surety bond, which are very difficult for independent small companies to provide, particularly new companies. There's no history to them, so to get a surety bond is near impossible. That piece of the agreement, it's really part of the agreement, it's not part of the pole attachment rules, is left over from the 1990s. It really doesn't probably have a place in there now. It's to ensure that if you were to walk away from the fiber on your poles, then the existing pole owners could take it down and have the funding to do that. It's really, it really isn't, it doesn't happen that way, and it's old legislation that probably should be corrected anyway. But it's a benefit to them because it's a barrier to entry into that market. The last is that even when you, the second piece of the legislation that's been asked for is that within the current administrative rules, it says that you have to negotiate an agreement with the pole owners, and in so negotiating an agreement, the pole owners negotiate all those administrative rules. So they want more time, they want more control, and they put that into the negotiations, because you're, as a small entity, you're sort of at risk of arguing and getting attorney fees, and that's exactly what they expect you to do. But they try and negotiate away all the administrative rules that have been created, and that's why we've asked for some language that says they can negotiate an agreement, but at the minimum, they need to adhere to the rules. And so, because otherwise the rules are useless, because if you're trying to negotiate an agreement with the current the current ISP, ILEC, they certainly hold more control and more attorneys, and that you'll be sitting there forever as they do exactly what they want to do, which is to delay the process till eternity. And so that's one of the reasons we asked for that legislation.
Good, Paul.
So, the current Public Utility Commission milestone intervals are 133 to 139 days. So that's from the moment you literally put an application to the poll owner and you say, I want to attach. It can take anywhere from 133 to 139 days to get that done. And then inside that interval, there are defined activities. This is different, similar but different to what goes on in the wireless industry. The wireless industry has something called the shot clock. If somebody comes into your town and your ordinances are contemporary, then they can come into your town and they have a certain amount of time where they're allowed to put an antenna on an existing pole. If the town or somebody tries to do I'll use a bad language, pocket veto this, it happens. The shot clock prevails. In this situation with pole attachment, all of the things that Bill talked about and the Carrolls have talked about come into play. Person says, sure, you want to attach to my poles, I have to go walk in the woods and oops, I've got Christmas tree problems, a half a dozen of my poles are falling down and I have to replace them, that's going to take a period of time. So this, just simply filing the legislation is a good place to start, but the reality of this is until we get the two Carrolls' inputs nailed down closely, we could be sitting here 2 years after the legislation is filed saying we haven't gone anywhere. So there's more hard work that we really have to do together to get this thing, get texture around this. Or just simply, again, disrespectful here, just simply filing a piece of legislation is not going to get it done. It's kind of we're happy we did it, but we didn't get a result. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Becky Mason from Tamworth. In that legislation, part of the rules should be the cut down time because, as Bert said, half their poles are rotten. Look at all the state highway projects that have been held up because they're waiting for utility companies to move their poles. It's not just broadband, it's everything that's done in this state. If you have to move a pole, you're at that builds cost, and that cost is shared by everybody in the state.
Yep.
Yep.
So I understand the legislation for the one touch, but as Carroll said, when negotiating, you almost have to negotiate that window down because it's their discretion if they want to replace a pole. It can be cracked in half for 4 years if they don't want to replace it.
So I'll put on my hat as a telephone or a pole provider, and I'll say, we have a lot of infrastructure out there that needs to get fixed. We have a lot of demands on our poles because somebody, and we even had this in our own little town, somebody wants to relocate a section of a highway and we happen to have a pole in where the new highway would be. We have to move all of that. So there's a lot of demands on a limited amount of resource. All of that, and I'm not trying to say this should slow us down, but all of that has to be considered as we do this, or we will be really happy with a piece of legislation that takes us absolutely nowhere.
This is a start for conversation, and got to start somewhere.
No, I agree.
And hopefully we can make something better out of it. So it's a start. If anybody's got any ideas, please forward them on to Jeb or Jerry or to myself, and I'll get them there for sure. I'm sure we're going to be discussing this again and again and again.
I would say this, Jeb, if there's anything we could do as a committee to help move this along, let us know in terms of testifying to at any committee hearings, whatever information we can provide.
Oh yeah, no, that's got to happen.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. No other questions? Let's move on. The non-CARES Act funding. The governor announced $50 million to be distributed to folks that wanted to do broadband. Jeb called me the morning after the governor announced it and asked me if we could put together a proposal of some sort and get it to him by Monday. I got 4 or 5 people together. Carroll Monroe talked to a couple of our ISP folks, and I sent out to everybody the $11 million proposal that I was able to get to Jeb by noontime on Monday. A week later, I guess the governor turned the whole project over to OSI, and they drafted up a RFP process. It kind of threw us right out of the picture because it mandated that you had to be a municipality or a current ISP provider. We're only a committee. So that took us right out of the ballpark. The proposal we put together, we worked long and hard over the weekend on it, and it would have got us to a point where we could put an RFP out at the end of that process for actual construction. And it's a shame more of this $50 million wasn't able to be used. In Carroll County, the town of Sandwich submitted an application, and we supported that. And the town of Wolfeboro applied for 2 grants for 2 small areas of Wolfeboro. Carroll County got 0. It's a real shame. I think the folks that put the RFP process together haven't a clue as to what's involved in the infrastructure of broadband, because it was very obvious. Glenn?
Rick, I think that, I mean, part of the issue too is that they were looking for projects that could actually get built in like a 3-month window of time.
I was getting to that.
Okay. Okay. And not so much what we were looking for, which was, you know, sort of getting ready for construction. Those projects I don't think were even considered.
Right, and the state dragged its feet. Even when people applied, the state dragged its feet, didn't make the announcements until August when they said they would be made in July. And the clock was ticking to the December 15th deadline. I spoke at great length to Rob Coster at CCI and you know, John Marr at Spectrum and the folks at GWI trying to get a handle on whether it could be done.
I see your camera.
There was a lack of materials as well that people were unsure of, just having enough cable.
Carol Miller wants to weigh in here. Carol, go ahead.
All right, Carol, go ahead.
Okay, I would say there is some good news though. We now have a new entrant into the market, and that's New Hampshire Electric Co-op, who received $6.7 million to do projects in the North Country. Unfortunately not Carroll, but much of Carroll County is served by New Hampshire Electric Co-op, so whatever happens in Colebrook area is going to translate into more service competition in the Carroll County area. So there was a silver lining to that dark cloud.
Well, that's partly good news, but we could have used all of the 50 million in rural New Hampshire.
I think Jerry Knoerk has raised his hand.
Go ahead, Jerry.
Just the New England Electric Co-op also did get a kind of clear message on their board of directors election that people are interested in broadband, and there is voting going on now. The deadline may have just passed or is going to pass very soon, which will allow them to be able to get involved in this a little more easily without having to go to their co-op members with every expense that they're going to do. So that they're currently working on that, and the folks in Sandwich are continuing to advocate for that on the side too. Thanks.
Yep.
Anybody else out there? Bill, I see your mic is open. Something you want to add? Nope. Okay. Anybody else?
No, my mic isn't open. I'm using my phone, and
okay.
It just looks like it's open.
Carol Monroe, you put your hand up. Open up your mic, please. There you go.
So what I'd like to know, and I'm not sure how we get this information, is it appears when you look at lists of companies and towns that got funding, and I know of some in this local Cheshire County area, are going to struggle to get what was requested by the RFP done, which is meaning customers on getting broadband before the end of December. I think it's the 15th, actually.
The 15th of December.
And so, you know, what is the outcome of that when they're finding that fiber resources are delayed out anywhere from 60 to 120 days? And what happens when the snow starts falling on October 31st, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, to that December 15th date? I ask that question because I think there are a number of towns locally here and across New Hampshire who might have put in for funding if they thought that date was going to be relaxed. And so what's going to happen as we go forward? And so I'll take that questions offline if anybody knows about it.
Carol Miller.
I can respond to that. I can tell you that the project that was funded for Fibercast in the Cheshire County is ahead of schedule. Gent Cav, the owner of the system, an old colleague of mine, and Carroll, you probably know him as well, from many years being involved in the industry, is ahead of schedule. Those projects will be completed. It is very unlikely that the December deadline will be relaxed. Very unlikely, for a number of reasons. One is I would be very ticked off if I were a community that would have applied if that had been relaxed a bit and had missed the opportunity, and now they're changing the rules. So I don't think we're going to see anything happen on that end as far as relaxing any timelines. We may see some additional funding come to the state, and there will probably not be a second round of broadband funding available for that. The other good news is, regardless of the funding, and Spectrum is going to be upgrading and expanding in the West Keene, which is the area that Rebecca Landry said that the Keene is poorly served with. So even though they didn't get funded, they're still going to get that investment. So that's sort of some good news. As far as the other entrants, they'll all be hard pressed to get their projects finished by December 15th. But if they don't get any of the money. And so they had a 10% of the funding could go ahead of schedule, but they don't get another dime until that project is completed. So all those companies will not get any of the money if they don't comply to the rules. So.
We have another speaker here.
It's interesting that you say that because I haven't heard you. Earl, I don't know if Earl will be completed or not by December 15th, but it would be interesting to look at all the CARES Act money that had to be spent for hotspots and stuff so we could get a third of our student population online for education up from Concord North, because I know for a fact that just in our area, Spectrum would not give anybody a hotspot that couldn't get, if they had an outstanding bill. Guess what? When you're not working, you have an outstanding bill. So as a municipality, the time frame to file for that information was so short to try and pull everything together. I just don't understand how the money was divvied out the way it was. That, to me, needs a transparency look.
I think we'd all like to know that.
Anybody else?
I mean, one of the other problems with the RFP also, from a municipality standpoint, is this was a reimbursement grant. They never said that until the RFP came out. They're going to give you a 10% in 30 days, and the balance, on December 16th, provided you finished your project as you presented it. As most people know, in municipalities, we have to abide by the budget law. Most people in towns don't have that kind of money laying around to take a gamble on whether you could finish a project by December 15th. So there was a lot of drawbacks to it. Paul?
Thanks. So we were disappointed, but it's not over yet, the way I look at the world. If you go back to the problem I thought we were trying to fix, and I think we still want to fix.
Well, could you get closer to the mic, please?
Oops. Is that better?
Yeah.
Can you guys hear me? Sorry about that. Yes. I was giving everybody a lecture about talking into the microphone. So I think if we go back and look at the problem we ultimately want to fix, and the problem is that depending upon whose report you read, whether you read the University of New Hampshire or whomever who's been studying this problem for a long time, there are some 44,000 people in this state who have no access to broadband, period. They can't get cell service and they can't get on the network, period. That's a big number. And it's, we could use all kinds of analogies as to whether this is like the Middle East or Africa. It's bad. 44,000 people cannot get on broadband, period. Now, that is a private sector, public sector opportunity. That's what it should be. And it's an emergency, as the governor said. I thought the governor, actually, I wrote this in an article, I thought the governor was kind of doing the rural electrification thing. I thought he was thinking about what Eisenhower thought about getting the roads paved without having towns grovel, beg for a road or for electricity. I thought that's where we were going. And it got into an administrative activity, and it probably will do better next time, would be my advice. But we have to keep our eyes on what the problem is. We're trying to fix 44,000 people who can't get on the internet. That's the problem. Awarding, and I think Bristol and Leominster, I think those people deserve a big round of applause because you know what, they pulled it off. They got it done. And we ought to give them high fives. But when you add up the amount of people who are going to get served, I think it's like 4,400 people. That means that 40,000 people still don't get on the internet. And it means we sent back 72% of the money that was of the 50 million. We sent 72% of it back for repurposing, which is good. It did have a string on it because it was federal dollars, so the feds get to tell us when you can spend the money. So I got all of that part. But I think, as I heard one of the Carrolls say, and maybe Jeb has told us, if there's more opportunity that's coming forward, we should think ahead about how do we deal with 44,000 people who can't get on the internet in the state of New Hampshire, and work on that problem and see if we can craft something with the public and with the business community. Carroll Miller. Thank you.
I just want to put that into perspective. If it's 44,000, are you talking about 44,000 households? There's 650,000 households. Is that the number we're working with? Or are we talking, what?
I pulled the information off the University of New Hampshire broadband survey study resource page that they had. I'll send it to you, Carol.
Yeah, I'm well aware of that, but be aware that that data is old. And, the discussion around broadband really now has to change because broadband at 25 megs isn't enough to serve a family of 4. So we need to talk really and concentrate on the infrastructure of the future. Fiber to the premise for everybody in the state of New Hampshire. And stop talking about broadband. Broadband is so old hat. We need the infrastructure of the future. We need to stop putting Band-Aids on a sagging telecommunications infrastructure. So that's the conversation I think that needs to happen. And it's a lot more than 44,000 people that don't have the infrastructure of the future. So there's a lot of room for investment and opportunity, and of course challenges. But that's where we need to keep our eye on the ball, and I will leave it at that.
Rick? Carroll, could I ask you a question?
Sure.
Could you throw out a number of what you'd like to see in terms of a minimum available speed? So, and would it be symmetrical? Would you say 100 by 100?
Well,
and let me explain why. The FCC is asking this question, and they set the standard. So, and right now there's an opportunity to tell the FCC what we think.
Well, I think that the standard, I mean, people want gigabit service. And the standard of broadband at 25 or 100 meg or 500 meg is insignificant to the infrastructure of the future.
I agree with that.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because our needs are just going to grow and grow and grow. So Carol Monroe may want to weigh in on this.
So I think the real answer to the question is, you should have a connection that allows you to do what you need to do and not ever have to worry about it not being there for your family of however number are in your household. And the only way that can happen is with a fiber to the premise solution that I can see today. Now, maybe there's something coming down the pike, and Elon Musk certainly thinks he has something. So there might be some solutions in the future, but to have it consistent and universal and at speeds, at whatever you need, I think that your only solution right now today is a fiber to the premise solution. I've really given this some thought lately, but it's and so whether you say 100 by 100 in 5 years, 100 by 100 might not be enough. Certainly symmetrical is incredibly important if we're all going to be working from home or doing schoolwork from home, which is an up and down situation where it's not just being presented to you like in a download fashion. They're actually interactive, and then the uploads are incredibly important. So symmetrical service. If they had to put a number on it, the FCC today, I'd put 100 by 100, but a gig is not if you're going to deliver 100 by 100, you can deliver a gig. So once you get to that kind of technology, it's not impossible to imagine. We're moving all our backhaul to in excess of 10 gig in the networks that I work with, and we're moving the connections and all of the area. Every new connection is going to be 10 gig capable as we go into the next year. So we really need to make sure these networks are robust, but we need to have some subsidy to get them up and running, because we know this is a rural area and it would be difficult to do it without some subsidy. So at the state level, maybe there's some way to reserve future federal funding for this purpose, because we know that there'll be some funding. We don't know if it'll come in the way of block grants or some other way, but if it does come in the way of block grants, we want to make sure that it isn't the last time we see money for broadband. For real broadband, for real fiber to the solution. And the existing carriers can take advantage of that too. If they want to extend their fiber to the home, if CCI wants to extend their Dublin fiber to the home service to Hancock and Peterborough and so on, why shouldn't they? And they're, as long as it's big broadband and in that way, they shouldn't be left out of the mix. But we need to get it done. So far, they haven't done it.
Bert, I'm recognizing you. Go ahead. Bert, turn up your mic.
Sorry, I didn't hear you say Bert. I just want to point out that it was explained to us at one of the other meetings that fiber optic is just a pipeline. And if you change the hardware at both ends of it, you have a completely new system. And so what we're planning on is a system that can be upgraded to meet with the growing technologies that come. And we're told that fiber optic is capable of that. So that to me was a good news piece.
That is very correct.
All right, I'd like to move on the agenda.
And Jeb Bradley has a comment.
Oh, he did? Okay. Go ahead, Jeb.
Yeah, I know that Victoria Laracy is on from Congressman Pappas's office and Chuck Henderson from Senator Shaheen's office. I've also communicated with Senator Hassan. I think that the congressional delegation earlier did a Dear Colleague letter urging flexibility on the December 31st spending requirement under the CARES Act. So everybody should know that the delegation is working on that. I think that, for Victoria and Chuck's point of view at this point, we're not alone in Carroll County with this problem. I mean, it's pretty obvious. It runs in many, many areas of the state. And I think that the leadership that the 4 members of the congressional delegation could provide in ensuring that there is funding, not just for New Hampshire, obviously, but all 50 states as a new stimulus bill, and there will be a bill. It's just a question of what it prioritizes and how much it is, and weighing in at this point in time to try to get rural broadband development with the federal dollars. That would go hand in hand what Jerry and I are going to try to do next year. So it just, since we have 2 members of the delegation on this call, just understand how critical it is and how much we need your help.
Rick, could I just...
I don't want to keep dragging this out. We'll be here till midnight.
Do we have anything else, Rick, or do you want me to move? You want to move along? Anything else? Anything else on this topic?
No, we can touch on it later.
All right.
Thanks, Jeb. Oh, wait,
Pat Farley had her hand up.
One more from Patricia Farley.
Go ahead.
Yes, we're talking a lot about what the important parts of education and the other reasons that we need broadband just to keep up with the world, like they used to need electricity one time. You're not mentioning telecommunication. I mean, the medical communication, telemedical thing. I don't know what the word is, but anyway, the thing is, there's a lot of people that aren't able to go to their appointments, and there is a availability that's coming more and more of the ability for the doctor and the patient to talk to one another by broadband. But when you can't get broadband very clearly, that's out for a lot of people that really need it. And I just wanted to say that should be maybe in the argument more, because that's hugely important.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Is that it?
I don't know. Is that it?
Yeah.
Do you have any other?
That's
wait, Jerry Knirk wants to punctuate the sentence.
Just a quick thing regarding what was just said. Even long before COVID, this was an issue because in the North Country particularly, we don't have very many specialists, and the ability to do telehealth, to do a specialist consultation can be quite valuable. And our long-term model of healthcare where the patient has to be transported or go somehow to the physician's office to be seen or provider's office is really kind of outmoded, and we can really do far better than that with much greater efficiency. And we've seen that, and providers have been quite happy with how this has worked, and we need to make sure that we codify this beyond the emergency so we can continue doing it. But it's true, if you can't get broadband, you still can't participate. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to move on the agenda. Next item is New Hampshire Municipal Association 2021-22 policy documents for upcoming advocacy for broadband. I sat on the policy committee with regard to broadband, and we were able to get quite a bit of coverage in there. In this past legislature, the Municipal Association helped and worked with us, in a lot of areas, but it was not officially part of their advocacy policy. And now it will be. So we will get a lot more coverage and support and advocacy from the Municipal Association in the next legislature. And I sent everybody a copy of it. It was to be voted on Friday. I didn't make the meeting because I had an emergency come up. And I haven't been able to find out if it got passed or amended. I would hope it had gone through because it passed the committee unanimously. So we can look forward to some help from the New Hampshire Municipal Association going forward. The next item on the agenda, survey results, and I'd like Carol Monroe to speak to that.
So I sent out a small PowerPoint presentation. Did any, Rick, did you get that?
When did you send it?
This morning, which is
Oh,
early this
I
morning.
haven't got anything this morning yet.
Okay. Can you share your screen and make me a presenter, and I can share it at least to the people who are on Zoom.
There's
and then
no pressure on me. I don't know how to do this, but I'll see if I can make it up as we go along. Stand by.
Well, I'll be making it up too, because I'm accustomed to Zoom, and this is not. This is GoToMeeting. It says you have to make me a presenter.
Stand by. I just made you a presenter.
Okay.
So now all the pressure's on you.
Okay, so let me see if I can bring up PowerPoint.
There you go.
It looks like your grocery list from.
I can't seem to. I have too many things open on my screen. Okay. So this is the results of the survey. I think you've all been made aware of.
Carol?
Yeah?
Could you enlarge that, put it into slideshow mode so we could see it a little better?
Yeah, I was trying to do that actually, and there we go.
Good, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There was hesitation there. Okay, so as you know, that the numbers were smaller than we would have liked, but we did get a significant number of people responding to the survey. And so as we all know, many residents don't have adequate broadband. And so when you look at this graph, you can see that about 56% say that pages loading from the internet are problematic. Certainly as it goes down, video calling, what we're doing now, what everybody's been doing lately, or streaming, about 50%, 47%. And when you get to the end, the people that don't have any issues, about 20%. Now keep in mind, we tried to get a lot of people to respond, those that have broadband and those that don't. So about 20% say they don't have any problems whatsoever with this issue. Access to cable and fiber varies by town greatly. You can see the percent of responders with cable or fiber. Certainly in the areas that we've already talked about: Sandwich, Hart's Location, Chatham, way down at the very end of that scale. And then Hale's Location, Freedom, Jackson, as you would expect, Conway at the upper end of the scale. So there's a number of towns that are without, and then you can see that scatter plotted to the right. Needless to say, we had a higher response rate in towns without service and then with service. And that's what we would have expected. I mean, that tends to be what the survey does. And so we have to keep all the results in mind as a result of, the fact that you get more responses from those areas that don't have any service, or those that have good broadband service are not likely to respond. It's those that have bad broadband service that are likely to respond. But interestingly enough, in this process, you can see that in these times, even those people that have cable are concerned about upload and the consequences of upload speeds. So, this particular slide shows us that they would be excited about having a fiber option. I have to caution you that we ask these questions on most of our surveys. If fiber internet that was competitively priced to your current service came to your community, how likely would you be to subscribe? And you can see even those that have cable internet today are pretty positive. We find that these results are optimistic, not for those that don't have service, but for those that currently have a cable product. Generally speaking, those with a cable product find it difficulty to pull the plug on their television channels, among other things, and their triple play. Even though they say that they would do that, it's not likely they do. We generally see anywhere from 11 to a 25% take rate of a fiber service in a cable territory, particularly if it's a cable company that does a good job with customer service, or a good job who has already moved to DOCSIS 3.1, which is what allows them to offer much bigger service and broadband and upload speeds. So what's the primary reason that they would switch? Better quality internet is the primary reason to switch, and that's why you see those responses from a cable provider, those that have a cable provider today. They're looking for better quality, and they're looking for more consistent quality. Some would prefer a lower price, but the primary reason to switch is that they need to have consistent, reliable broadband connections. And that's where we need to be across the state of New Hampshire. If we're going to have children doing schoolwork from home and patients relying on telemedicine, it needs to be consistently reliable, and it needs to be symmetrical, or at least have a high upload speed as well as download speed, even if it's not symmetrical, in order to make this work in New Hampshire as we go forward. I think we've learned a lot from the pandemic, and so even if we all get vaccinated tomorrow, not likely, but tomorrow, we got our second shot in 30 days, there would be something else that comes down, down next year or the year after from a healthcare perspective, but also from a weather perspective. And so you just don't know what's coming, and the ability to be able to be flexible by working from home or going to school and getting your work done from home is important for everyone, particularly those in rural areas. Think about how many days we'll save for snow days if we don't ever have a snow day again in the educational system. Instead of a snow day, everybody gets their blizzard bag and their internet access codes, and they work from there, and the teacher teaches from home. There's a lot of benefits to doing this as we move forward. Of course, we always ask this question about willingness to pay. And it's always all over the map. And it's difficult to move, to understand, who is really willing to pay and at what level. We know of individuals that, have a cell phone and a data plan, and they somehow manage the $180 a month to do that. And yet, there are other reasons they can't pay other types of services. Maybe that's their only communication. It's possible. Everybody's budget is different, and what you tend to allocate for it varies greatly. I would love to have my fiber service to be about $50 a month when I get it. I tend to think it's not going to be, but it would be great if it was. But everybody has a different way of spending it, and this particular question is always difficult to assess how much you're willing to spend. But you can clearly see it goes down rapidly once you get to about $70 to $80 a month, or $60 to $70 a month in terms of what people are able to spend on broadband. Now, this is internet only. We don't ask the question in terms of a phone service or a triple play. And so if you would add phone service, it would change those dollar amounts. So we had a long discussion about this survey before we put it out there about privacy concerns. And so what are we going to use the data for? Well, it does establish somewhat where quality broadband already exists. You can see that on the mapping. I want to remind you all that the 60 days from the legislation has passed, and it's time to reissue those requests for information so we can really determine exactly where the cable providers can provide cable at 25.3 or better. If they do not respond in the 60-day window, then we make the assumption they're unserved. And what that really means is that you have a document that says they're unserved, and you now are, I can tell you in Carroll County, you're more than 90% unserved without the cable. And that will allow you to go for grants and funding that would not necessarily have been available to you. But they're required to answer that survey, and if they don't do it, then we consider those areas unserved for those purposes. Now's the time to get that survey back out there, or that request for information, sorry. We understand what the priorities and the pain points of our current residents are. It did tell us some information about that, where there's enthusiasm for a fiber option. And the survey also included some demographic information that we'll be able to use as we do the feasibility study. So that's where we stand today. We do understand that the information that we gathered from the survey was really to understand the competition, to assess the financial feasibility, and to prioritize areas without quality broadband options. The data in its fine points is not available for others to use, so it's certainly nothing that we would even consider selling or anything along those lines, or sharing in any way, except to do the feasibility study for you. And that's what I have today. I can turn this over and then take questions. Do you want to take control back?
Okay, if anybody has any questions, raise your hand out there in TV land. Mr. Highland has a question here.
I will send out to everybody the PowerPoint presentation that she just provided us so that you can see it. Nobody told me to check my email this morning.
Sorry. Been a long weekend.
Yes.
Carol Monroe, thank you very much for putting this together. Bill, do you have a question?
Yeah, I guess, have you taken any sort of insights from this? But the ones that I got primarily from that graphic was that we've got 3 or 4 towns that are in serious trouble, and then, you know, half our towns, a little more than that, probably could live for the next couple of years without major improvements. We're in a crisis right now. Is there anything we can do in the short term to help the small number of people that really need it, while we continue to look at the long term?
Go ahead.
I think we have to take the results at the time that they were taken. I've talked to a lot of people that work in brick and mortar buildings that the pandemic has showed, not around here, in bigger cities, that the pandemic has shown they don't need their brick and mortar anymore. It's actually more cost effective to have their people working at home than working in their brick and mortar. And I know of 3 people that I've talked to, their businesses have now shut their buildings. They are going completely remote because it saves them money, it's faster, their people are available, and their people are much more happier. So it would be interesting to see how this survey might shift in the next 4 years, because people are determining that they don't need those brick buildings anymore.
Yeah, not to encumber this with any facts that may be outside of the state, but the Business Council, which is chief executives around the United States, Boeing and those kinds of corporations, were saying that some 40 to 60% of their workers are not going to need to come back to the building. Rents in the city of Manhattan are down 20%. I don't feel too bad for those people, because rent prices are still off the charts. You know, here in our town, we have seen an unprecedented amount of building permits, land purchases, people have figured out that coming to New Hampshire, probably shouldn't say this on TV, people have figured that they ought to come up here. But the first question they're asking their realtors is, how do I get on the internet quickly? And so I think the trend is, if that one doesn't tell us that we don't have a trend here, I don't know what does. So I kind of like Bill's comment that says there are people who are in desperate shape now. How do we help them now? And I don't know how we do that, but that would be something we ought to get focused on. Carol, can I ask you a question? When you the chart that said reliable service, would you back up to that one, please? You know, you had the,
I'm sorry, can you speak that again?
You had the, there you go. You have the bar there. Nope. Go one. Yes, that one right there. Better quality internet is the primary reason to switch. So, is the quality? Did you get any insights? Is it the quality that the service goes down unacceptably high, or is it that when I try to call to get help, I have to take a 45-minute nap before they answer the phone, or is it a little bit of both?
We did a survey.
But in
sorry,
this,
go ahead.
It's probably a little bit of both, but I think it's more important that the current service is unreliable. That's what I think this is telling us. The current service is unreliable, and at different times it's non-existent, but other times it's perfectly fine, and so it's all over the map. So you can't rely on it to be there for you. So I think it's more about that than the customer support, which was a different question down the line.
Okay, thank you, Carol. I appreciate it.
Of course, they go hand in hand, because if the service is down and you can't find out why, and you don't know how long it's going to be down, and you have a 10 o'clock Zoom meeting, you know, and you're struggling to determine what to do next, that comes into that customer support. So I think that the service providers are not really clear about being down. You know, they don't have the same services available like the electric company does. If your electric service is down, you can find information by phone or by internet access or on your cell phone that will tell you it's down in these towns, we expect it up at a certain time. Not that it's always reliable, but you know, there's a lot of information out there. That doesn't happen for broadband.
Thank you, Carol. And Bill, did you have a comment? Yep, Bill.
Yeah, we did a survey at our high school. We wanted to know both staff and students who was having problems. We had only 25 responses, but it was funny that half of them were from people that had cable and half were from people that had DSL. And I think the DSL problems are pretty well known. You know, only one student at a time can use the internet. It does go down a lot. They're in the middle of file transfer and things fail and so forth. So I think those are well-known problems, but it surprised me that half the respondents had problems with cable as well, and that would lead to that, you know, better quality of service of internet. We gathered those addresses and sent them off to the cable company, because we're seeing whole neighborhoods that are complaining. You know, we'll have little hot spots in some of our more dense neighborhoods, and so perhaps it's a provisioning problem that just need to get more backhaul from the cable company. Okay. So that's how we're approaching that problem, rather than we don't necessarily put new infrastructure there, but for the folks that have DSL, you know, they're just in terrible trouble right now.
Bert?
Yes, to speak from a town of deaf people. When we had the meeting in Wolfeboro, where Consolidated came to the meeting, and I got in line and spoke with the two gentlemen there. And my house is 3 miles of copper from the switch. And there's another switch that's about 3/4 of a mile from my house. Actually, it's less than that. But I'm a right turn off of the main road, so that's part of why I'm a little bit further. But the company has a policy that they only connect to that switch going the other way. And there's no technical reason they couldn't connect us backwards. And they said, oh, we'll look into it, but of course nothing has happened. I don't know what this committee is capable of doing to get them to cooperate, but there are some short-term fixes. I have 3 megabytes per second. If I had the 10 that I'm paying for, it would be a world better, and I have to pay for 2 of them, that would give me 20, and that's at least something to work with. But it's very frustrating, but if anybody has worse service than me, I pity them.
Thank you. Anybody else here in the room?
Which company was?
I think he was talking about Consolidated. Were you talking about Consolidated?
Yes, I have Consolidated Dsl, and it's so bad that they made me put in a second DSL line, for which they charge me an extra $20 a month. But I'm paying for 10 megabytes. I get 3 from each.
I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but over the weekend, AT&T, who is a very large DSL provider, announced they're no longer selling the service. They've effectively said they're out of the DSL business for 2 reasons. One is it's pretty vintage, and 2 is the cost to maintain the service is bad. We probably, Rick, and all of us probably want to ask our dear friends at Consolidated what their plans are for DSL. If AT&T's bugging out, then you know that's probably a market signal that we probably want to get our heads around.
Bert, send me an email and remind me, and I'll give you the contact information for Rob Costa.
I have it. I have 2 cards I put in my pocket, and I gave them to my neighbor with the 4 children just last week when she complained, "Oh my God, what am I going to do?" But I do have their contact information. I guess I need to bug them myself.
All right. Send me an email, and I will send you back some contact information for Rob Costa.
Mr. Plash?
Sure. Question for Carroll, real quick. The slides that you've prepared, can those be publicly released at this point? Can we use that information? We're doing some comments to the FCC right now.
They're in the public.
And a couple of those are pretty pertinent to what we're doing.
They're in the public.
Yeah.
Yes,
okay.
Well, presenting them here, it makes them public anyway, and so yes, you can use them as public. That's the reason we didn't provide the detailed data on each question individually, is because of the need to keep some of it out of the public view.
Yeah, and that's fine. I just want, the slides are very
fine.
So,
Okay. I'll send it to you.
yeah.
And Carol, this is Paul again. On the next chart, I think we did the willingness to pay. Could you hop over to that one, please? The willingness to pay chart. Yeah, there you go.
Yes.
So a quick
Willingness to pay.
Yeah, that one there. So a quick lookup tells me that across the United States, the average internet service only, so just internet access, forget about all the other fun stuff that you can get. Yep, you got your pen on it. It's about $60 a month. And for $60 a month, you get 55 service. So 50 coming down at you, 5 going up. And the average annual increase on that increment of service over the past handful of years has been about 20%. So you can well imagine that 50/5 service is going to start migrating towards that second, the upper one, where the willingness to pay might be a little harder to prove out, unless the cable company or the wireless provider or the fiber provider or whomever, the ISP, is capable of providing a better quality of service. And that was kind of why I was, Carol, why I was poking at you for that. Is it availability, or is it, when it breaks, I just can't seem to get anybody to talk to me? That's kind of why I was poking at you around that. Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Everybody good? All right.
All right, Rick.
Let's move on.
Can I take the presenter back?
The next item on our agenda is the status of the feasibility financial study. Carol?
We've provided, if you remember, this is a partnership of 3 companies working on this through a grant, and there's a company in Vermont who did these slides and who worked on the survey called Rural Innovation Strategies, And then there's a company in Maryland called CTC Technology and Energy. They do, CTC does a lot of broadband studies across the country. So they're going to be the ones doing the detail of the feasibility study with the information that you and all of us have worked on for the last 6 months to a year. The one missing element that we have is this, cabled area. Which areas are covered by cable, and how many subscribers or how many current premises have a cable connection. That information, they've had that issue before, and they think they can use a number of the federal documents from the FCC to determine some of it, as I've been doing as well, to make some assumptions. But it would be really very helpful if we could have the results of an RFI. The cable company should be willing to provide that. I think they're required to do that, but we've not seen that yet. And it's more than just a map. It needs, we've seen some hand-drawn maps where somebody took a map and highlighted the roads or something along those lines. If it's a map, we need to have it in GIS format from the cable company. Alternately, then we need the addresses in which they can provide 25 by 3. So that's an outstanding piece of it, but we have sent all the data and all the work that you've done, as well as all the interviews with the existing carriers and potentially new carriers that we did last spring and summer, that you did. All of that information has gone to them, and they're going to start working on that, they said, in October. So how that goes. It could be October 31st, but at least they'll be working on it by October 31st. We'd really like to get that done, because I do think there'll be additional federal funds coming through. I'm optimistic about that. We'll see where it goes, but we want to be ready.
Rick?
I'd just like to say something. The next item on the agenda is a meeting that Paul O'Brien and I had with Melinda Kinney, who's head of government affairs for Spectrum Charter, and also John Mayer, who we've been trying to deal with right along here. We have requested that information, whether it be a GIS, a shape file, or one of those type of files that we could overlay, onto a GIS map, find out where they're served, and using the E911 information that we received from the state of New Hampshire, we could determine how many premises aren't served. I spoke with Melinda Kinney a week ago, reminding her, and she's still working on it. I think she's having issues with their legal department still, but we are working on that. Go ahead, Paul.
So I spoke with Melinda this morning on another matter, and I reminded her that she owes you something. She's keen to publishing her email address if any of the towns have charter service. Allegedly, John Marr has sent out maps to the towns. If you haven't gotten them and you have charter service, Melinda said just get back to her. I think there's an ambition there to try to help. It may be, I don't know whether it gets clogged up in the company plumbing or not, but there's an ambition there. The thing that the cable, now I may be wrong, but I don't think so. The cable industry measures how many homes they go by. They do not measure how many homes well, they could tell you how many homes they have service in, but the way they measure things is homes passed. So there's a wire on the street. The telco, the local exchange company, will tell you how many network connections they literally have because of their USF and all that kind of stuff. So the telco, it showed us, and I think all of us, by town, by spreadsheet, back in January, what percentage of their local exchange connections were 25/3 or not. The cable industry will tell you how many homes they pass, and that's why they give you a map. Now, I think what has to happen is you have to look at the map, and to Rick's point, we have to find a way to kind of incorporate more data on that. I'll be honest with you, we did that when we bid the CARES situation, and we did bid with Charter for a segment out on the Ossipee side of our town, and it wasn't hard to do. A little bit of back and forth conversation, I think, could be helpful. But Melinda is keen to wanting to solve this. She understands they probably haven't been as responsive as they needed to be.
The problem we have is all they sent out to the towns was a map with a street and a blue line that went to a certain point on the street of premises that they pass. But there's nothing we can overlay. If they'd have put along with those blue lines, with, this blue line passed 44 houses. Or, that would benefit us tremendously.
Well, actually, we did that. Charter couldn't tell us where the premises,
Right.
is that the plural of premise? Where the houses were. So we literally
It's always
went
premise.
Premisi. So we went to our assessor and our GIS mapping system, and we just flew over the area, and we literally just counted them with a toothpick. Just counted how many of those things are. So I don't know whether they can help it, but combining your GIS capability and their homes past maps will get you pretty darn close.
Well, if we could get a shape file or something like that, you can overlay it, and it makes work, a lot easier and quicker. And that's what we've requested. We will see.
So,
if we don't get anything, we're going to send out another RFI request to them, which they have to address within 60 days according to the new legislation. And if they don't, we can assume that they don't serve them. And in that meeting, I also expressed to them the dissatisfaction most towns have had with their service and follow-up and whatnot from their customer base currently, and made them aware of it. It was a very frank meeting, I think Paul referred to as. And that was
uncommonly candid.
Very candid, yes. I won't repeat the statement I made to her, but in private I will, about their service. Melinda Kinney is very eager to come to one of our meetings and address the committee. I was going to invite her to this one here, but we had a lot of items, and I didn't want us to be here all day. And I would probably say the next meeting we have, whether it's similar to this or all virtual or whatever, she would like to come speak to us. And anything you have to add to that, Carroll?
I think that we did have some success, by the way, in asking for the 911 information. It is, it's confidential. Once again, it won't show up on anything that you can, that you could identify necessarily. And so, but it's because that is a GIS type of file, included Latin longs. If we could get a GIS type of file from the cable company, you could overlay that with a different layer and then clearly see where it's served and where it's not. So when you're looking at a small section, say if I were looking at Conway and I was looking to determine what wasn't served, it would be pretty easy to tell because it would be very little that's not served. If you're looking at areas in which are a real mix, that's why you need this information in GIS, because if you had to go from one screen to the other just to count households not served, it would be a very tiresome way of doing it, and it's probably not very accurate. So, so that's what we're looking for from them, and the sooner the better.
Well, Melinda led us to believe that they do possess shape file for all their maps. So that's what we're looking to try to procure from them.
Well, again, the way it worked for us is we just got on the phone with them. We spent time with them. We went back and, we had our town planner who really knows this stuff. And it may not be a bad idea to just, invest the time to get some documents, get on the phone, look at them together, and then thrash at it, and then hopefully you'll get something.
Yep. Okay. Thank you, Carol. Moving on. The next item on the agenda is communications districts. As you know, the legislation passed last year authorized communication districts. The question I have for everybody on the committee is, should we move forward toward forming a committee? The process, I've read HB 1111 at least 7 times now, and the process is basically the select board of a town or municipality votes to put a article on the warrant of a town meeting to get town meeting or legislative body approval, okay, to form a communications district planning committee. And that's the start of the process to do it. The planning committee is made up of a minimum of 2 people from each municipality participating, appointed by the governing body or the select board. And their responsibility is to follow the language in the statute to come up with basically the government of your communications district. And then it has to go before the Attorney General in Concord for his blessing and approval. And then it has to go back to the towns again at town meeting to get legislative approval to be an actual member of the communications district. Looking at it, it's probably at minimum 1.5 to 2 years worth of work, time-wise, because of the way the legislation was written. And what I'd like to do at this meeting here is all the representatives from each of the individual towns, could you go back and get on the agenda of your select board meetings and actually ask the boards of selectmen in your respective towns if they wish to participate in forming this communications district planning committee process. And then get back to myself so I can figure out how many towns would be interested in doing it and how many are not interested in doing it. The benefits to doing it, and this leads me into the next item on the agenda, reasons for forming the communications district. We've always said that we trudge along here as a committee. One of the problems that came up with this CARES Act money, and when the RFP came out, it was only geared to municipalities or municipal entities, okay, and ISP providers that are already in the business of providing internet access. We as a committee are not an entity that would qualify to even apply for a grant. If we were a communications district, we would be a municipal entity and be able to apply for those type of grants. And I would encourage everybody, I sent out to everybody a copy of the final version that the governor approved of HB 1111, and I've highlighted a little bit of it for my own use. I'd ask you to read it and meet with your respective select boards and see if it's a process that we want to start. And the reason I bring it up today is town meeting is in March. We have plenty of time to start working on this so that we're not scrambling at the last minute. If all 19 towns or a large portion of them are interested in moving forward with this, my suggestion would be to let's write a warrant article that every town can use so that we're all talking the same language at town meeting. And the vote at town meeting is only to form a committee. There's no commitment other than that. The commitment to be a bona fide member of the district when it's formed, okay, will come at a later town meeting. Okay, it's kind of a long process. Carroll, Monroe, and I discussed it last evening for probably about an hour. It is a lengthy process to do. It could be expedited if we could go to March meeting and get the committee going, and if the committee could get their job done and through the Attorney General, there is the option to call a special town meeting. For instance, if all of a sudden a lot of money became available, say, from the federal government for infrastructure. If there is none of that money available, we could continue to the following March town meeting for any approvals at that point. Yes, Denise?
As we approach our town boards...
Denise, come a little closer to the mic, please.
As we approach our town boards to adopt this, it probably would be also helpful to have a sample of the language for the warrant article.
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah, we could, it's going to be a simple, really simple language.
Yeah.
It, you know, do you legislative body authorize the select board to appoint 2 members minimum that'll serve on this planning committee, okay, to meet and, you know, basically they call it an agreement, but it's probably no different than a set of bylaws. It forms the government of that district.
Mr. Plash?
Sure. Rick, why don't we circulate some language?
I mean?
Why don't we circulate some language to everybody that they can put?
I wanted to throw this out today and see what the interest is and that sort of thing. There's no real commitment at this time other than to form a committee to start looking into it and dealing with language.
Yeah,
Which in essence you already have done, but it needs select town meeting approval.
Yeah, I think the planning part of it, getting the planning committee set up is a no-brainer, and you just go through the process and
let's see what we come up with and see if it's a...
The next step, the communication district, gets a little more complicated, and then, you know, what happens if only a handful of towns want to participate after they go to town meeting? You know, then we don't have a unified county-wide process, if you will. But I guess we take that when it happens. But
you know, I think we have to take it one step at a time to see what the committee would actually come up with for a government or an agreement, or you know, they refer to it as an agreement in the legislation. It has to be approved by the Attorney General, and before it goes to a vote, the second town meeting. This committee has to do public hearings in each of the towns that are going to vote on it.
Jerry Knerk.
Yes, thank you very much. I think we should proceed with getting this on the town, or getting town warrant articles in for town meeting. I think that it will give us the strength, even if it turns out that it's not what we can do. We don't want to lose potentially like a whole year in terms of being able to make that process work, because we've done a lot of work, but we have to then work within the framework of the framework of the communication district to actually realize what it is that we've been working on for a year.
Yep. So, good.
So I'm from Eaton, and you know, we're a very small town, so I think it's absolutely no-brainer to join into some larger group because we have no leverage, of course. But what I wanted to ask is that, this is kind of taking a big step back in my view, right? Because it's kind of why we started having these meetings in the first place, right? And so now we're redoing that. So is there reason to expect that there is money available or will be money available? Why we would do this again, right? Because it didn't work the first time. And is that connected to the funding that Jeb and Jerry are trying to get from the state? Or is this addressed to some possible federal funding or another thing? Because I've been through the numbers for my town, and there's no way that we can afford it by ourselves. So we need help.
Right. Yeah, you're not the only town.
Rick, could I maybe comment on that?
Go ahead.
So the problem that this committee has is it doesn't have any legal status as an entity that can apply for one of the grants, and that's what we ran into.
Yeah, I understand.
With that program. So
I read the proposal while we're sitting here, so I get it, and we missed that. We as a group own that, right? Because that was in June, right, and we missed it.
That was the one grant. There are a lot of other grant programs out there, and those will continue. I think it makes a lot of sense to move forward with this district opportunity to create an entity. In the meantime, there are also a lot of other grants, a lot of federal programs available, and if you do some research, there's dozens of grant opportunities.
Maybe at the next meeting you could share
a few of them might fit. Yeah, I can do that. I can do a presentation. And so we should also brainstorm about what entity could apply for those grants. Maybe it's the county government, since every town in the county is part of this. I don't know if they would sponsor it or not, but somebody needs to be available to do that. We should talk. Okay.
Right.
Yeah,
But at the same time, I don't want to turn this into a career, right? I want to get this done. I don't want to spend years looking at options.
I don't either.
Multiple fundings and all that kind of thing, right?
It's a good point.
We're starting the district.
I'm recognizing your colleague across the table.
Okay. Sorry, Chairman. Go
ahead. Bring your mic down, please speak.
I don't think it's taking a step backwards. I think we all know that there's available funds out there. It depends how we get them, whether it's a town applying to apply it to their area, county, or whatever. I think it's a step forward to say we're in this to get it done. And once we become a municipality, we will have more borrowing and grant availability than we've got right now. So I don't see us stepping back. I see us taking a parallel route both ways. We're still going to look at what we can get while we're a committee, but once we become that planning district committee, we'll have a little bit more bite. And if we can get the district, we'll have a lot more bite.
Right. I think when we started this group here, though, right, that was the pitch, right? We have this group, we're organized, we're gonna work together.
We're going to continue to work as this committee. I mean, I think Becky was reading my mind, because that's what I wanted to say, is we're not going to stop the committee's work. This is going to parallel the committee and work toward that at its own pace by way of the statute, okay? And we as a committee are going to continue on the same focus and track that we were on.
Bert, I see
we're waiting for a feasibility study. And when that's complete, we're going to sit down and evaluate it, and we may be going out for an RFP at that point from the committee.
Bert, there's one person ahead of you. Please mute your mic. I'll call you on you in a second. There you go. Your turn.
Just to say that I agree with you, Becky. It's not a step backwards. It might be, a little bit of a hiccup in the process, but the legislation that we didn't have available to us when we formed this committee in the beginning now exists and has set forth a process to make to make things more formal and to get us ready to have these communities become a communication district. So, you know, I mean, we were, you know, because of the work that Steve and Rick did to start this, and then other folks, the communities themselves joining in, sort of put us in a position to laying the groundwork for the legislation, and now the legislation gives us the opportunity to become more formal and structured. So, but I don't think it's a huge step backwards. It is.
I don't believe that either.
It is, in a way, a little bit, I'll say, unfortunate that it's this multiple step process, and it's going to end up being probably a 2-year process instead of perhaps a 1 year. But because even to do what you said, Rick, if we were to get most of the communities to agree to go into the planning process at the March town meeting, to get them to then spend the money on a special town meeting in advance of 2022 is that's probably going to be a tough sell. So I mean, we're probably looking at a 1.5 to 2 year process to get the district formed. But anyway,
I'm going to recognize Bert and then Jerry after Bert. Thank you.
Could somebody explain the proposal that GWI made and what changes would need to happen in order to realize it? As I understand it, if we became a recognized entity, they could apply for grants, and they have said they could finance this, but I'm a little fuzzy on some of those details.
Well, the GWI proposal, okay, was a proposal in general to the county as a whole. I would believe that they would be interested in doing a few towns at a time, but they, as well as CCI and Matrix DG, who was the third provider that came and presented to us, all expressed interest in dealing with one entity, because we're such a large group of 19 towns spread over. I mean, it seems 3 hours to drive from north to south end of the county and whatnot. They would rather deal with one entity. It's not to say that, you know, when Steve and I started this, we accepted the possibility that, you know, you might have a group of 3 or 4 towns in this area of Carroll County that would get together and work with someone, and another group of towns here, or do the whole county together.
Mr.
Okay?
Knurk.
That's still to be determined. That's still not off the table. It's still a possibility. Okay? The only thing I'm saying here with this communications district is I picture it paralleling our committee work, okay, so that we can work toward accomplishing it, so that if we do need it, it's at our fingertips.
Okay, Jerry, you're up.
Yeah, thanks, because I have to leave for another meeting in a moment. Yeah, that's the whole point. It is a parallel process. I think we've done a lot of work. And think about if we created a communications district without the work we had done, we'd have to start from scratch. This way, we just import this knowledge that we've developed and the connections we've developed, all that work that Rick and Steve have done to get this ball rolling, so that then that communications district doesn't have to start at the beginning. And indeed, you know, we did work toward this legislation so that we would have that structure to be able to do it. I had kind of brought up to the committee, to the county at a delegation meeting, the idea of maybe trying to do it on a county-wide basis, having the county be the responsible governmental unit. But there were some people that were particularly not interested on the on the Carroll County delegation in getting involved in this. And so I'm not sure we could get that through on a county level. I think we need to make sure we start all of our processes at once, so that whichever can happen first, happens first. And I think the communication district is created to allow us to do this, and we probably ought to start it as a parallel process. So thanks for the meeting. I will be signing off.
Thank you, Jerry. If everybody remembers when we first started this, there is another option. We could form a 501c4 corporation, a not-for-profit corporation, and continue this forward as well. So, I mean, there's nothing off the table at this point. It's just that the district format is going to take time to make happen. And if we don't start right now toward that, it's just going to be farther down the road before we can make it. Paul.
Thanks. So I think the idea of forming a committee makes sense. At least our strategy here in this town is to turn over every rock. Because right now, you know, we're all in a different space, but we all have one thing in common. Not everybody in our town is served. So our strategy is to get everybody served, period. Once we get that done, or in parallel with getting that done, then we want to give everybody a choice. But the first thing, our first priority is to get as many people, like to 100%, served. And so every rock, I think, needs to get turned over. Federal money, state money,
private money,
banging on the carriers, and I mean that in a very respectful way, banging on the wireless companies, asking, you know, we hear the other day that our friends just got a $425 million tranche of refi, saying that they're going to go from 6 to 64% fiber penetration in northern New England. That means they must have had a presentation to their board of directors. They must know exactly the towns they're going to go after. We would like to know what that 64% means to Eaton.
Yep.
Conway.
Yep.
Yeah. So we should be respectfully turning every rock over, because if we don't, somebody else is going to turn rocks over for their counties in some other state in this country, and I just don't think that's the right model for us. So I'm supportive of this, but if you listen to what we've said, we're a year and a half out, maybe 2, best case, on this strategy. That's okay, but that's okay. In the meantime, we all have, and this is the, you know, every town has its own challenges. We have RSAs that allow us to acquire through warrant, you know, dry powder if we wanted to make some investments. And you guys actually helped us get those pieces of legislation, and Jeb and others did as well, so we're appreciative of that. But I think this is a turnover every rock strategy.
Well,
all focused to getting everybody served.
That's been Steve and my philosophy right from the beginning.
I have a question.
Thank you.
I have a question down here.
Anybody else? Yes, go ahead.
I have. I guess I need a better understanding of the need for the district and the need for this committee. Because representing Conway, I know that there are rocks unturned. But as a member here, I'm more concerned about Eaton and Chatham having nothing.
Right.
And so I don't know, I'm not sure, I don't understand, I guess, the 2 committees. And I have a harder time going to, not that I'm not supporting it, but going to my town that I know that's pretty well covered, and not, you know, and getting the support for it, and seeing a place like Eaton go, and I can't imagine getting 2 people from Conway to serve on the district, and then people to serve on this committee. I don't understand why it's not one committee, and if someone could explain that off to me, why these same people wouldn't be. I understand the district and getting money. I also with the CARE Act, I'm not sure I understand why some of these towns didn't work. I know in Conway you could join in. They had an X amount of money that was given. I, as a nonprofit, joined in on that to get money through the CARE Act. Can stuff like that be done with this committee?
The RFP that came out...
Up closer to the mic, Rick. Thank you.
The RFP that came out for the broadband specified that only municipalities and ISPs could apply for that grant money.
Okay, but why?
Even the wireless people couldn't.
Okay, so what, if this committee can become a 501c4, is it? And grant money, would that be an easier turnaround than to wait until 2023 to get the district committee? I don't understand. I mean, I'm just asking for an explanation.
Right. I mean, this committee is going to continue on its present course. The feasibility study gets completed. We're going to evaluate it and probably at that point put out RFPs, requests for proposals from ISPs around the country.
And then where would you go? I mean, if you're putting it out,
right,
you can't accept the money. Are you telling me that you can't? You can do it, but if they're going to give the money out, it's going to be given to municipalities.
We can accept money from private enterprise.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Comment?
Becky?
Bring the mic forward, please. Thank you.
I see this committee turning into the Communication District Committee. The reason for it, think of your water systems. If you're a private water supplier that has 10 houses, you got little bargaining power with the state or anything. If you're a water district, you can go out and get mega grants, federal, state, private, FDA, the whole thing, to get money in to assist you. As a municipality, I couldn't apply. I'm a selectman in Tamworth, and I did all the CARES Act. We couldn't apply for the internet or the broadband ability because I didn't have $40,000 I could put up front to hopefully get back maybe in 6 months. We didn't have that in our budget. We're small. We're Tamworth. We put a spending freeze on. We were lucky we got where we got. So I see this as just taking everything we've done and getting it into say a water district. That's basically what it is. Instead of it being one town's water district, Tamworth isn't big enough to have a water district, but we are big enough to participate in a grander water district. It's getting stuff more regional than independently municipal.
I guess you're answering my question, because that's why I don't understand why this committee and the district is going, getting this district is going to go parallel to each other. Why not work to get it one?
Instead of waiting for the district to be formed, we continue working what we're working. So if we become a district, all the background work is done. We're not starting over. I don't see it as if the district's formed. I don't see starting over. I see it proceeding from where this committee has taken it. That's all I see. It's a more formalization.
Okay, but then I'm going back to the point of getting the representation for two separate committees is a tough job. Getting representation for this is a tough job, not only getting representation for two things different.
Oh, I just see it as the same representation. That's, from my town, it would be the same people would be represented on here as they would be
But maybe
on
your town, but you're unique. But if it's going to the voters, it's all going out, getting it, having you be on this committee to work this committee, and you be on that other committee, time-wise, I think that's a lot of time given. I think it's one committee, it should be. That's my opinion.
I think that's a very fair observation from a town like ours that has a high level of service. Customers may not like it, but we have a high level of penetration of capabilities, and someone may say, why? So I think that's a fair question.
Oh, yeah, no.
Mr. Plash, you had a comment?
One big difference between this committee and the district would be the bonding authority. So
I agree wholeheartedly with you.
But that's what some of these operators want to see. That's what the providers want to see.
I agree wholeheartedly with you. I agree completely with you. But I still am saying that this one should, the people that are here that have developed all this knowledge over the number of years that I've been on it, they move into looking at working towards the district thing. I can present that better to my selectmen than I can say we're going to have two individual programs going on.
I think in a lot of towns, in Albany, for instance, I'm probably going to be on that committee because we have a hard time getting volunteers also.
It makes sense for this committee to morph into that official committee after the meeting. But in the meantime, there's probably no reason it can't work on some of the items that are necessary for the operations, for the committee, official committee, list of things that they need to do, including an agreement and bylaws. And even though you can't vote on it and have it be official, all those documents can be discussed and put into place in anticipation of.
And I agree with that.
So, and if by chance, some of the individuals on this committee are not on this committee going forward, that could happen anyway, but there are new individuals that we'll need to bring up to speed, then I think that's also a possibility. But in the meantime, having draft documents is a huge step to getting the final documents done, particularly if we can get some sort of volunteer legal opinion on them, since we don't have any money, or a grant to get a real legal opinion on them.
Or a private entity.
Okay, I will
and the
send
grant
out.
could go to any one of your groups. It could go to the country council or to, the economic development groups for that purpose.
Okay, I will send an email out to everybody with the question that would go to the governing body or select board, and a rough draft of a warrant article. We can fine tune it between now and March. Okay, moving on. Next item, we're still looking for a clerk or a secretary for this committee. If anybody would like to volunteer. With Steve on the mend, it's almost a full-time job.
Steve looks really good out there to me. He looks handsome right now.
So if anybody's interested, please email me or call me, and we'll set you right up. The next item is other business. We had a meeting on February 13th, 2020, and I'd like to propose that we approve those minutes. They were sent out to you back after that meeting, and I also sent them out in recent emails to everybody. So I'd entertain a motion to...
Motion to approve the minutes from February 13th.
Okay. And a second? Becky? Okay. Is there any discussion, errors, or omissions? Okay, hearing none, I will call it to a... I don't know if can we do a roll call vote?
I think because you're virtual, you should do a roll call vote.
Yeah.
You have to do a roll.
Yeah, okay, we will do a roll call vote. I'll go around the table here. Matt?
Yes.
Denise?
I'm going to abstain because I wasn't in attendance.
You what?
I wasn't in attendance at the February.
Okay, abstain.
Glenn, yes?
Glenn? John? Okay, Becky?
Becky, yes?
Yes.
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 She votes. I'm the alternate.
Okay.
Out there in TV land?
Okay, why don't you go, Paul, why don't you quickly go around?
Okay, Bill Gassman? Thumbs up, yes. Carroll Miller? Yes. Chuck Henderson?
Not here.
Not there.
Julie Dolan?
Abstain.
Jeb Bradley?
Gone.
Mary Cronin?
Camera's on.
Abstain, I wasn't there.
Pat Farley?
Yes.
And Bert, are you, thumbs up? There you go. Motion passes.
Okay. Did you want to say anything
Sure.
further on the FCC? We're
real quick.
running out of time, so I'll give you a minute.
Come up
Okay,
to the microphone, Matt, a little closer so we can hear
that
you.
should be enough. So there's an opportunity to submit comments to the FCC on their annual broadband report that they're developing now. And we're preparing those. The major issue is the 25.3 definition of broadband. and we're going to say that it needs to be raised. Most commenters in the docket have agreed that it needs to be raised. We'll talk about the Form 477 information gathering form. It is wholly inadequate. The FCC is proposing to use it again for their report in '21. We believe it's wholly inadequate, and for obvious reasons. The FCC has reconstituted its Broadband Deployment Advisory Committee as of, I think, March of this year, and they've established several subcommittees, but there is no subcommittee looking at deployment in rural areas. So we're going to propose that they create a subcommittee for that as well. And we're also going to comment that, and they've asked this question about mobile services. And the comment would be that mobile services are essential, mobile communications are essential to life in rural areas, but not a one-to-one substitute for a hardline connection with broadband. So.
And we are going to comment as a committee on this to the FCC. It's due in today, and Matt has offered to draft up the communication and submit it on our behalf.
So Matt, could you just make sure that we all understand what the definition of an essential service is and what the implications of that are? It's important.
Okay.
Okay, is there any other business to come before this committee? Okay, seeing none, the only other thing I'd like to say, Steve Knox is still up there listening to us. Get well soon, Steve. And with that, so we don't have to go through roll call vote, I will declare this meeting adjourned as chairman.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, everybody, you can all hang up. We'll send you the, you're going to send the minutes out, right? And I provided Rick the information on that 44,000. Okay, bye guys. See you later.
Yeah, and I didn't have time this morning to call Margaret or anybody to see it.
Add essential service.
I'm not going to use the word.
Huh?
And it was a real.
I'm not going to use that word.